Everybody knows Tennyson's poem, The Charge of the Light Brigade. Of the 670 men who rode into the Valley of Death, nearly half were killed, wounded or captured. But what happened to the survivors? Well, despite Tennyson's words, "Honour the Light Brigade," some of the heroes of Britain's most famous cavalry charge found themselves living in workhouses and buried in paupers' graves. In 1890, Rudyard Kipling was so appalled that he wrote a scathing poem which spurred the 80-year-old Tennyson into action. 7 years later, at Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee, a bugle call sparked the final push to save those forgotten heroes. This is their 73-year-old journey from Balaclava to Britain's backstreets and back again. On October the 25th, 1854, during the Battle of Balaclava in the Crimean War, approximately 670 cavalrymen from 5 regiments of the Light Brigade, the 13th Light Dragoons, the 17th Lancers, the 11th Hussars, the 4th Light Dragoons and the 8th Hussars, charged down a valley against Russian artillery. The result of a miscommunicated order, what should have been an attack on retreating Russian forces, became a full frontal assault on prepared artillery positions. The men rode for over a mile under fire from 3 sides. Of the 670 men who charged, 118 were killed, 127 were wounded, and about 60 were captured, and 475 horses were killed or had to be destroyed. Alfred Lord Tennyson wrote his famous poem within weeks of the charge, and it was published in the newspapers across Britain. The poem transformed these cavalrymen into national heroes. Honour the charge they made. Honour the Light Brigade. Noble 600. But what happened to those men who survived? And did Britain honour its returning heroes? Well, it's a very mixed story. Some good and some sad. Although the Victoria Cross, Britain's highest medal for valour, was only instituted 2 years later, it was backdated to the beginning of the war, and 7 men from the charge were amongst its earliest recipients. One of them was Lieutenant Alexander Dunn of the 11th Hussars. Born in Ontario, Canada, during the charge Dunn came to the rescue of Sergeant Robert Bentley by cutting down 2 or even 3 Russian lancers who had attacked him. Bentley was desperately hanging onto his horse by one of the stirrups, so Dunn dismounted, lifted Bentley back into his own saddle and then struck the horse on the rump to send it galloping to safety. Now on foot, Dunn then caught sight of Private Harvey Levitt from his troop, who'd lost his mount and was in danger of being cut down by a Russian hussar. Dunn rushed to his aid and killed the enemy with his sabre. Dunn was the only officer at the charge of the Light Brigade to be awarded the VC. He also became the first Canadian to receive the medal. In 1864, he transferred to the 33rd Duke of Wellington's Regiment of Foot and was promoted eventually to Colonel, becoming the very first Canadian to command a British regiment, and indeed the youngest colonel at the time in the British Army. 4 years later, in 1868, Dunn and his regiment took part in the expedition to Abyssinia, now Ethiopia, which I've talked about in a previous episode. There, he was tragically killed when his hunting rifle accidentally discharged. He was only 34 years old. Lord Cardigan, who'd commanded the charge and controversially returned unscathed, was greeted as a hero back in England, living in luxury although still under some controversy until his death in 1868. Whilst not coming from the landed classes like his commander, John Ashley Kilvert of the 13th Light Dragoons would find success both in business and in public life. He became a successful pawnbroker in Wednesbury in the Black Country, where he also served as both the town's mayor and a justice of the peace. Trooper William Pearson of the 4th Light Dragoons lost 4 toes during the battle. Nevertheless, upon returning to England, he became a fellmonger, a sort of dealer in sheepskins, establishing a successful business near Kendal. He died aged 82 in 1909 and was buried with full military honours in the town, where his grave is marked by a handsome memorial to this day. James Mustard enlisted in the 3rd Dragoons in 1850 at the age of 20. and he then transferred to the 17th Lancers 2 years later. Wounded in the charge, he left the army and set himself up as a successful tailor in Twickenham, Middlesex. When he died, aged 85 in 1916, he was laid to rest in his grave at Twickenham Cemetery to a volley from a firing party drawn from the 17th Lancers, his old regiment. He died as the last surviving 17th Lancer from the charge of the Light Brigade. John Parkinson from the 11th Hussars was another success story. Upon leaving the army in 1866, he became a policeman in Birmingham, and during a 26-year career he rose to the rank of sergeant in the Ladywood area of the city. Another survivor from the 11th Hussars was William Henry Pennington. Born in Greenwich in 1833, Pennington had only joined the army earlier in 1854 in search of adventure, which is one way of describing the charge of the Light Brigade, where he received a musket ball in his right calf. This resulted in him spending a period at Florence Nightingale's hospital at Scutari. By 1861, having left the army, he had established himself as an actor on the London stage. Playing leading roles from Shakespeare, he also became the manager of the Sadler's Wells Theatre. For some veterans of the charge, emigration offered a fresh start. The Enrolled Pensioner Force was a scheme for time-expired soldiers to serve as guards on a one-way trip on convict transportation ships en route to Western Australia. Upon arrival, they were then given a land grant. Between 1850 and 1861, approximately 9,721 convicts were transported to Western Australia, escorted by over 1,000 former soldiers. 2 Light Brigade survivors took advantage of this opportunity, Henry Naylor and John Gray. Now, Naylor's sabre is now preserved in the Western Australian Museum, whilst the Perth suburb of Greylands, which is now actually called Mount Claremont, was named after his comrade. But against all these stories of success and happiness, there are others far less rosy. In an age where welfare was almost non-existent and support for veterans equally woeful, many struggled to adjust to Civvy Street, and as age and old injuries caught up on them, it only got worse. Samuel Parks was born in Tamworth, Staffordshire in 1815. He'd worked as a labourer before enlisting in the 4th Queen's Own Light Dragoons in 1831, claiming to be 18 when he was actually still 15. He served for 11 years with the renamed 4th Light Dragoons in India, including during the First Anglo-Afghan War. In 1854, and now nearly 40 years of age, he was with his regiment at the charge of the Light Brigade. During the charge, after his own horse was shot, Parks ran to the rescue of Trumpet Major Crawford, who was also dismounted and under attack from 2 mounted Cossacks. Parks stood in front of him and fought off the 2 attackers with his sword. The 2 men then attempted to retreat up the valley, but were attacked by 6 more Russians. Parks kept them at bay, retiring slowly while fighting and defending the Trumpet Major, until he was disarmed by a shot. Parks and Crawford were taken prisoner and held for over a year by the Russians. Upon his return to Britain, Parks was court-martialed for desertion, but he successfully argued that he'd only been taken prisoner because he was wounded, and the charge was dismissed, and he then received all arrears in pay owed to him. And if you think that this was military procedure going bonkers, then the next bit is almost comic. The man previously charged with desertion for being captured was now awarded the Victoria Cross for his actions saving Crawford. He proudly received the medal from Queen Victoria at Hyde Park on the 26th of June 1857, the very first Victoria Cross investiture. Parks was discharged on the 1st of December 1857 with 4 Good Conduct badges as an out-pensioner of the Chelsea Hospital. After his military service, he then served as a warden at Hampton Court Palace, and then joined the Hyde Park Constabulary, ending his career as an inspector. Yet despite his heroism and the nation's highest honour for gallantry, Parks died in poverty in 1864, just 10 years after the charge. He was buried in Brompton Cemetery in an unmarked pauper's grave. And he wasn't the only hero from the charge who fell on hard times. Private John Richardson of the 11th Hussars returned from the Crimean War but struggled to find steady employment. Unable to support himself, Richardson ended up in the Cheetham Workhouse in Manchester. By 1890, it was revealed that at least 6 survivors were residing in workhouses. It was this revelation about how these heroes had been left on the scrap heap that roused the indignation of Rudyard Kipling to write a sequel to Tennyson's famous poem entitled The Last of the Light Brigade. Kipling's poem commemorates a supposed visit by 20 of the survivors to the elderly Tennyson, who was now aged 80, reproaching him gently for not writing about the way England was treating its old soldiers. Kipling wrote powerfully of the contrast between the public celebration and the private suffering. "O 30 million English, that babble of England's might, behold, there are 20 heroes who lack their food tonight. Our children's children are lisping to honour the charge they made, and we leave to the streets and the workhouse the charge of the Light Brigade." In Kipling's poem, Tennyson too responds with outrage. The poem continues: "The poor little army departed, limping and lean and forlorn, and the heart of the master singer grew hot with the scorn of scorn. And he wrote for them wonderful verses that swept the land like flame, till the fatted souls of the English were scourged with the thing called shame." There is no evidence that the meeting ever took place, nor that any additional lines were ever written by Tennyson that swept the land like flame. But whether literal or allegorical, the poem, the suffering of the veterans, and the aged Tennyson's supposed indignation at their treatment touched a nerve with the British public. 3 days after its publication in the St James's Gazette, Kipling's poem and the plight of the survivors was being debated in Parliament. The Secretary of State for War, whilst sympathetic, dismissed calls for financial help, as he claimed that would be giving special treatment to the charge of the Light Brigade veterans ahead of all the other veterans who had fought in the Crimean War. This lack of government action led to the formation of a voluntary body, the Light Brigade Relief Fund, and one of its leading supporters, the 80-year-old poet laureate, Alfred Lord Tennyson. He recorded his original Charge of the Light Brigade poem onto Thomas Edison's wax phonographic cylinders, the very early type of gramophone. These cylinders were then played at fundraising events across Britain, and are among the very first recordings ever made of a major literary figure. 2 other fundraising recordings were also made, one by the ageing Florence Nightingale to her "Dear Old Comrades of Balaclava," and the other by trumpeter Martin Landfried, one of the veteran trumpeters from the charge. By 1890, he worked at Hannington's department store in Brighton, where his connection to the famous charge made him something of a celebrity. On the recording, Landfried states in his distinctive Irish accent, "I am trumpeter Landfried, one of the surviving trumpeters of the charge of the Light Brigade at Balaclava. I am now going to sound the bugle that was sounded at Waterloo, and sounded the charge as was sounded at Balaclava on the very same bugle on the 25th of October, 1854. And then the haunting bugle call is sounded. And even now, after all these years, the crackling recording sends a shiver down my spine, and it's incredible to actually hear the voice of a man who survived the charge." Donations from across the country poured into the Light Brigade Relief Fund. Within weeks, John Howes, formerly of the 4th Light Dragoons and now a bootmaker in Digbeth, Birmingham, who'd fallen on hard times, received £15 from the fund, a sum that kept him from going to the workhouse. But one fund couldn't solve the plight of all the survivors in hardship. In 1897, Thomas Harrison Roberts, a London publisher, decided to invite Light Brigade survivors to watch Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee procession from the windows of his office in Fleet Street. Through painstaking research, Roberts managed to locate and bring together 74 survivors. During the procession, Queen Victoria's coach actually stopped to acknowledge the assembled Light Brigade survivors. And then something extraordinary happened. Trumpeter William Perkins of the 17th Lancers stepped forward. Perkins had been a teenager when he rode in the charge. Now the 60-year-old grey-haired veteran stepped forward, placed the same bugle to his lips, and once more sounded the charge. The moment was electrifying, and the crowd fell silent. The sound of that trumpet call, played by a man who had sounded it in the Valley of Death, brought tears to many eyes, reportedly including the Queen herself. And that bugle call resonated not just with the crowd in London, but across the country. A call that these veterans should not be forgotten. Within days, Thomas Roberts had established the Balaclava Light Brigade Charge Survivors Relief Fund, often simply called the Roberts Fund. You wonder why. In just 4 months it had raised over £500, equivalent to approximately £65,000 in today's money, and was providing regular allowances to 20 survivors who were in desperate need. Private John Ford of the 4th Light Dragoons was amongst those who received support. Ford had been living in extreme poverty, dependent on occasional charitable handouts. The Roberts Fund provided him with a weekly allowance that lasted for the rest of his life, that allowed him to live in dignity in his final days. Private John Smith of the 17th Lancers, known to his comrades as Blood Smith, although the origin of that nickname is unclear, was another beneficiary. Smith had been facing a pauper's burial, but the Roberts Fund ensured that at least he received a proper funeral when he died. By 1899, 35 veterans were receiving financial assistance from the fund. Now, seeing as 550 men survived the charge, including all the wounded, but that some of them had already died by 1897 and some were doing all right financially, 35 is a sobering number of veterans still in need of financial assistance. As the years passed and another, even more terrible war engulfed Europe, the number of survivors dwindled. With the death of William Henry Pennington, the survivor turned actor whom we mentioned earlier in 1923, just one survivor remained. Edwin Hughes of the 13th Light Dragoons holds the distinction of being the last surviving participant of the charge of the Light Brigade. Born in Wrexham, Wales on the 12th of December 1830, Hughes worked as a shoemaker before joining the 13th Light Dragoons at Liverpool on the 1st of November 1852. His discharge papers later described him as 6 foot 2 inches tall, with fair complexion, grey eyes and light hair. During the fateful charge at Balaclava, Hughes's horse was killed beneath him, trapping his leg. He was taken prisoner by the Russians and held captive for over a year before his release in October 1855. Following his military service, Hughes married and had 2 sons and 2 daughters, and he eventually went to live with one of his daughters in Blackpool in 1910. He also received a pension from the Roberts Fund. When in 1925 the Roberts Fund finally ran out of money, the president of the Patriotic Society, the Duke of Connaught, stepped in with a grant of £65 a year to support Hughes. And that grant continued until his death, aged 96, in May 1927. He was buried with full military honours in Leighton Cemetery in Blackpool, the last of the Light Brigade. When Tennyson wrote "Honour the charge they made," he created one of the most famous lines in English poetry. But Rudyard Kipling asked the harder question: what does honour actually mean? Does it mean writing poems and erecting monuments? Or does it mean making sure your veterans don't die in poverty? And that question still remains relevant to this very day. Well, I hope you found that story interesting and maybe a bit thought-provoking too. And if you did, then you might also enjoy this one. Thanks to my financial supporters, and thanks to all of you for joining me today. Keep well, and I look forward to bringing you more forgotten stories from British history very soon.